I'm sorry, sir. Your name isn't on the list. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the funeral grounds. The officer's voice rang out, firm as stone, as he stood upright before the wrought iron gates of Maplewood Veterans Memorial. The 82-year-old man stood still, Walter Harlan, silver-haired, dressed in a neatly pressed dark brown suit. In his hands was a faded cream envelope, handwritten in blue ink, the cursive elegant and slanted. To Mr. Walter Harlan, please escort to the front row. With respect, Eleanor Monroe. But the officer still shook his head. We're only admitting guests with formal invitations, not handwritten notes. This is a high-security funeral. Generals, national dignitaries are in attendance. I hope you understand. Walter said nothing, not a single word of protest. He simply removed his brown hat, placed it solemnly over his heart, then stepped back, yielding his place to those whose names were on the list. Inside, the sound of a brass bugle began to rise. An American flag draped over a light walnut casket rested beneath a white canopy in the silent courtyard. The front row was already filled, but one seat remained empty. That seat was his. No one inside knew that. The man turned away at the gate was the same man who had once carried General Everett Monroe out of the line of death in Vietnam, 1968. And in just a few more moments, someone would recognize him. Someone with enough authority to halt the entire ceremony, just to salute him. Have you ever seen someone treated unfairly, simply because their name wasn't on the list? If you believe that honor doesn't require a uniform or a rank to be earned, hit subscribe and join us in telling more stories like this one. Walter Harlan didn't leave the gate right away. He stood there, quietly, as the distant sounds of traffic and the soft echo of funeral drums pulsed from deep within the grounds. One hand clutched the rejected envelope, the other gripped the rim of his old hat, as if letting go might make every memory vanish with it. His starched white shirt collar was crisp, his brown tie knotted precisely. Not a single wrinkle out of place. Because for Walter, today wasn't just a funeral, today was the final farewell to the only person left on earth who still called him brother. For 43 years, Walter had worked as a janitor at Eastbrook Public School in Milltown, Georgia, never missing a single day. Except for the 1 week he took off, the year his wife passed away. And now, today, the last person remaining, Everett Monroe, was gone too. All that was left, a long train ride to Capital City, a handwritten letter from Eleanor Monroe, and one empty seat at the front of the cemetery no one dared to sit in. People walked past him. No one looked, no one asked. Only one young woman in a black dress, holding her son's hand, glanced his way and gently shook her head, as if to say he didn't belong there. I'm not late, he whispered to himself. I just came, 55 years after. But I never really left. Beyond the gate, within a ceremony full of flags, music, and generals, no one knew that the man standing outside had once carried that very general out of a storm of bullets in the misty bamboo forests of Quang Nam, Vietnam. And back then, he didn't need to be on any list. He only needed one reason to step forward. Walter took one more step closer to the iron fence. Inside, the military band had taken their places. The opening notes rang out, measured, solemn, restrained, like the uniforms each guest wore with silent pride. He pulled the letter from the inside pocket of his blazer for the third time, unfolded it, looked again. Eleanor Monroe's handwriting was still as graceful as ever. She had once taught calligraphy at the high school where Walter had worked as a janitor. Walter, if you come, please hand this letter to whoever is in charge. Tom wanted you to sit with the family. You've always been family. But when he held it out, the young officer, Lieutenant Parker, tall, buzz-cut, voice clipped and cold, shook his head once more. I understand, sir, but only names on the hard list are permitted in the honors section. Walter held the young man's gaze just a second longer. I'm not asking for honors. I just want to say goodbye to the man who remembered my name, when the world had already forgotten who I was. Lieutenant Reese, standing beside Parker, turned slightly away. His eyes flickered with hesitation, but he said nothing. Another officer passed by, waving a group of black-clad guests toward a side gate. Walter stepped back toward a stone wall near the entrance. leaned gently against it. The wind passed through, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and white chrysanthemums. He opened his thin wallet, pulled out a worn, frayed photograph. In it, Walter and Monroe, two young soldiers, dirt-smeared and exhausted, stood side by side in a trench, one arm over the other's shoulder, the other holding an empty canteen. That day, they survived. They came home, but only one of them was ever honored. The other was left standing outside the fence with a letter no one wanted to accept. Everything was beginning now, and once again he was being left behind. Quang Nam, Vietnam, June 1968. In the rainforest, there was no dry season. It only shifted from wet to wetter. Walter Harlan, just 25 years old at the time, crawled low across a muddy embankment, an M16 clenched tightly in his hands, knees submerged in muck, eyes darting through the haze, rising from an unexpected ambush. "Be careful, they've circled the ridge." An explosion, earth and rock flung into the air. The sharp staccato of AK fire cracked so close that Walter could feel his own heartbeat skip in sync with each burst. Lieutenant Everett Monroe burst out from the tree line, his left shoulder drenched in blood, his leg dragging behind, shrapnel wound. "Radio's dead," Monroe gasped, collapsing near the trunk of a jungle tree. "They're closing in." Without hesitation, Walter lunged forward and dragged Monroe behind a fallen log. "You're not dying here, Everett. Not while I'm still standing," Walter whispered, his voice trembling, but his eyes steely and resolute. He reached into Monroe's chest pocket, pulled out a purple smoke grenade, and hurled it straight toward the advancing enemy. The smoke erupted thick and fast, swallowing the area in less than 5 seconds. "Wrap your arms around my neck. Hold tight." Monroe tried to shake his head, to say something, but Walter had already hoisted him onto his back, and ran straight into the gunfire, ran with everything a man could summon, to keep another life from slipping away. By the time they reached the trench, Walter collapsed, spent, his uniform soaked in blood, half of it Monroe's, the other half, no one could say. "You're insane," Monroe whispered with a faint, broken laugh. "You know that?" "You owe me a cold beer," Walter replied, breathless but relieved. "Maplewood Veterans Memorial, present day." Walter slid the battlefield photo back into his wallet, his gaze never leaving the row of seats beneath the white canopy. The empty chair was still there, and he knew, if Everett could rise up right now, he would call out, "Walter, what are you doing out there? That seat, it's yours." Walter sat on the stone ledge near the side gate, slowly removing his cloth gloves, revealing wrists frail and wrinkled with age. From the inside pocket of his jacket, he pulled out a small piece of fabric, folded carefully as if it were a ritual. The olive-green color had faded. The stitching had been repaired with fishing line. In one corner, 2 hand-embroidered initials, E.M., uneven but clearly intentional. Everett Monroe had given him that armband after the battle in 1968. "You wear this," Monroe had said, "so that if I don't make it, at least a part of me still goes on with you." Walter slid the armband over his left wrist, gently fastening it. His hand trembled slightly, but his gaze remained steady and unwavering. Inside, the funeral had begun to settle. Rows of guests in black were seated in silence. A military officer spoke into the microphone, but the wind carried off most of his words. Only fragments remained. Honor, service, loyalty. Walter looked up. From where he sat, he could clearly see the front row beneath the white canopy. The seats were covered with elegant linen, each tagged with a name. They were chosen. They had a place, except for one chair, set slightly apart, with no name card. No one sat there. That empty seat was meant for him. Not because of a list, not because of rank, but because of brotherhood, the kind no event planner or protocol officer could ever recognize. And yet now, the only thing between him and that seat was a single gate and a handful of young soldiers who had never lived through war. Walter tightened the armband on his wrist, then whispered, "I don't need the door opened for me. I just need one person to know I once stood beside him when no one else dared to." In the front row, among the rows of decorated uniforms and folded flags, one man had not yet taken his seat. General Nathaniel Pierce, four-star general, supreme commander of Eastern Strategic Forces, once leader of multinational operations, stood silently, observing the ceremony with an unwavering gaze. He wasn't looking at the casket. He wasn't listening to the ongoing eulogy. He was looking outward, through the sheer white curtain, toward the side gate, where an old man sat alone by the stone wall, a faded olive-green cloth wrapped around his left wrist. Pierce narrowed his eyes. Sunlight filtered through the trees and shimmered against the old man's silver hair. And something inside General Pierce suddenly paused. "Sergeant," he turned to a senior officer beside him. "Who is that man outside the gate?" "Permission to verify, sir." "No need to verify. Just tell me. Why is he outside?" The officer hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "He's not on the list, sir. We were instructed to admit only guests with formal invitations. It appears he's just a walk-in guest." General Pierce didn't respond immediately. He stood there for another moment, looking. The man was still sitting, no pushing, no shouting, just lifting his head slightly, eyes steady and still, like the forest they once fought in. And the way he didn't try to force his way in made him impossible to ignore. Pierce stepped away from the front row. He said nothing to anyone, didn't look back. His footsteps were slow, deliberate and heavy, as if leaving behind a ceremony, to walk toward a truth no one else had dared to face. The microphone echoed across the courtyard. "And now we invite the chief chaplain to deliver the final benediction for General Everett Monroe, a husband, a father, and a military legend." The crowd straightened their posture. Service members rose to attention. The live stream cameras adjusted their framing, and then a hand was raised. Not loud, not disruptive, just a single motion, firm, razor-sharp, and heavy with the weight of 4 stars. General Nathaniel Pierce stepped into the center of the ceremony and turned toward the podium. "Stop." The chaplain froze mid-sentence. No one understood what was happening. "Pause the service. There is someone who must be brought in before we continue." Every eye turned toward him. The wind picked up, slicing through the rising tension like a blade. "Lieutenant Parker, Lieutenant Reese," he called toward the side gate. "Escort the elderly man outside the gate, personally, immediately." The 2 officers stood frozen for a beat, then looked at each other and sprinted. Inside the memorial grounds, everything fell still. No one moved, no one spoke. A 4-star general had just halted a national military funeral, not for a protocol error, but for a man not on the list. Walter Harlan was still leaning quietly against the stone wall when the 2 young officers arrived. "Mr. Harlan," Parker said, his voice almost hoarse, "General Pierce requests your presence, personally." Walter slowly rose to his feet. He said nothing. He simply placed his brown hat back on his head, one hand gripping the cream-colored envelope, the other gently smoothing the faded armband on his wrist. As he stepped through the gate, no one needed to be told, everyone stood. A young soldier whispered, "Who is that?" That General Pierce stopped the entire service for. No one knew his name, but they were beginning to feel he wasn't just anyone. A silence unlike any before blanketed the entire Maplewood Veterans Memorial. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed against the white stone floor, steady, unwavering. Walter Harlan, 82 years old, holding a now creased envelope, stepped through the metal gate where, just 30 minutes earlier, he had been turned away. Inside, nearly 200 people had risen to their feet, not out of obligation, but because the man now entering was being escorted by General Nathaniel Pierce. Just a few steps from the front row, General Pierce stopped. He turned, stood tall, heels together in military posture, and raised his hand in salute. A formal salute. Precise, firm, no shortcuts, not for a senior officer, not for a flag or a national anthem, but for a man with no rank, who had once swept school floors for 43 years. Walter stopped in place, motionless. His eyes quivered slightly, not from surprise, but because he understood exactly what was happening. This salute wasn't to honor him. It was to honor the man he once saved, and the bond he had quietly carried for over half a century. Walter gave a gentle nod, hand over his chest, but he did not salute back. Because he was never a soldier, he had never worn a rank. But General Pierce spoke, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "You don't need a uniform to be saluted." That sentence sent a quiet current through the rows. A major leaned toward the person next to him and whispered, Who is that man?" The other replied, "I don't know, but if a 4-star general stands at attention to salute him, we should stand still and learn what respect really means." Then General Pierce extended his hand with the dignity of an official aide-de-camp. "Mr. Harlan, may I have the honor of escorting you to your seat?" Walter looked ahead, to the row beneath the white canopy where one chair sat empty without a name. The chair he knew had been saved for him. He stepped forward beside the highest-ranking officer in attendance, yet carried in his heart the quiet humility of a man who had spent his life working with ordinary hands in an ordinary world. The empty chair sat in the front row, far left, right beside the widow of the deceased. Eleanor Monroe, dressed in a simple yet dignified black outfit, her hat veiling half her face. From the beginning of the ceremony, she hadn't once turned her head. But the moment Walter approached, she looked up. Their eyes met, and time seemed to rewind. The crowd faded, the rituals disappeared, even the flag over the casket ceased to matter. There were only the two of them, survivors of war and of everything that no one ever speaks aloud. She stood. One hand held her hat, the other extended slowly, gratefully, and trembling. "Walter, I told Tom that, if you came, I would be the first to take your hand." He squeezed her hand gently, as if holding back memories, as if holding back tears. Then she whispered, "He knew you'd come. And this seat wasn't meant for just anyone." Walter sat down. He said nothing. He simply removed his brown hat, resting it on his knees. One hand still clutched the envelope, the other gently held by Eleanor, like a candle cradled between palms, not to let the wind carry it away. Up front, the chaplain's voice resumed, but now every word seemed to carry more weight. "We honor a husband, a father, a general, and a loyal friend who never left his side." Walter looked straight ahead at the flag-draped casket, and for the first time all morning, he sat exactly where he belonged. No invitation, no name card, just the memory of one heart. That never forgot him, even when the world did. The funeral was drawing to a close. The crowd remained silent, still standing. And in that quiet moment, Eleanor Monroe, seated beside him, opened her leather wallet. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with time. "Tom wrote this last year," she said softly. "He didn't want to send it early. He was afraid you wouldn't come. I told him, if Walter Harlan is still alive, he will come." Walter didn't reply. He just nodded, slowly, and opened the letter. It was handwritten, the strokes still firm like they used to be, though some lines trembled now. "Walter, if you're reading this, it means I've gone ahead once again, and this time I won't be coming back. I used to wonder who I should pass my medal to, someone deserving, and everyone thought I'd choose a general, some high-ranking officer. But you know something? If I had to choose again, I'd choose you. Not because you saved me, but because you never walked away, even when the rest of us did. I was a coward. I never had the courage to say it out loud while I was alive. But I hope that when you read this, you'll know. I never forgot." At the bottom was a signature, slanted, clean and final, Everett Monroe. Not 4-star general, just a soldier, writing to his friend. Walter folded the letter and pressed it gently against his chest. He closed his eyes for a moment. Didn't cry, didn't tremble. But when he stood up, his shoulders were straighter than before. Because sometimes honor isn't found in titles or ceremonies, it's found in a letter, written at the right time, to the right person. A gentle breeze rustled through the rows of white chairs, leaves drifting down beside the sharply dressed uniforms. The soft, mournful notes of the trumpet echoed across the grounds. The melody of taps, a final farewell for those who have served. As the flag-draped casket was slowly lowered into the earth, Walter Harlan rose to his feet. No one asked him to. No one called his name, but he stepped forward, slowly, his left leg limping slightly, a wound from the battlefield. A plain white shirt on his back, and on his right arm, a faded armband stitched with 2 letters, EM. The entire cemetery held its breath. Walter raised his hand in salute, not a salute from rank or title, but from the man who had once saved the life of the one now laid to rest. The man who had carried 170 pounds of flesh and blood on his back through the bullet-soaked bamboo forests of Quang Nam. General Nathaniel Pierce did not hesitate. He shot up from his front row seat, posture firm, face solemn. "Attention! Soldier!" The command cracked like a rifle shot. In an instant, more than 30 uniformed soldiers in attendance sprang to their feet. They didn't ask why, they didn't need to. They saw the arm raised, and they knew that man was worthy. Walter's hand trembled slightly, but he didn't lower it early. And in that single fleeting moment, no one saw a frail old man out of place. They saw a soldier who didn't need his name on a list, only to be remembered with respect. The funeral ended. The honor guard began stepping back from their positions. Walter Harlan didn't leave right away. He stood a while longer, hand resting on the frayed armband, eyes still fixed on the freshly covered flag-draped grave. General Nathaniel Pierce approached quietly. "We owe you more than any medal could ever express." Walter simply smiled and shook his head gently. "I only did what anyone in our old platoon would have done." A week later, a short video began spreading across social media and local news stations. The headline caught fire: 4-star General halts national funeral to salute a man not on the guest list. The image of General Pierce saluting Walter was shared by millions. Comments flooded in: "How many silent heroes like this have we forgotten?" Reporters sought out Walter. They found him smiling, broom in hand, sweeping the porch of his modest rental home in Milltown, Georgia. When that general shook my hand, I knew I didn't need anything else. No social media, no interest in long interviews. Walter still walked to the library every morning to read the print newspaper, still patched roofs for neighbors now and then. No one knew he had once saved a general's life. No one knew he had once been turned away from that same man's funeral, unless they happened to watch a video not even 90 seconds long, and stayed to watch it until the very end. In the small town of Milltown, Georgia, people only knew Walter Harlan as Old Mr. Harlan, the man who wiped the library windows every morning, fixed the church pipes when they leaked, and sat on the park bench every Saturday afternoon feeding breadcrumbs to the birds. No one noticed that he lived alone. No one knew he had once been an army mechanic, and even fewer could have imagined he was the man who had once saved General Everett Monroe's life. One morning, the neighbor boy, Tobias Jenkins, 12 years old, burst into his house breathless. "Mom, Mr. Harlan's on TV. The whole school saw it." On the screen played the now viral clip: an elderly man, slightly hunched, holding his veteran's cap, standing in salute before a flag-draped casket. A 4-star general approached and saluted him in return. Tobias turned to his mother and asked, "Who is he?" His mother, eyes fixed on the screen, quietly replied, "He's the man who once saved a general's life." But no one remembered his name, not until last week. That evening, Walter sat in his usual spot on the park bench. Tobias walked up to him, handing him a handmade card. "Thank you for doing the right thing, even when no one was watching." Walter looked at the card. The handwriting was messy, uneven, a child's effort, but it spelled his name correctly. And for the first time in years, he placed a hand over his chest. Right above the armband, stitched with 2 fading letters, EM. He didn't need a list, just one person to remember. It was an early autumn afternoon. Walter sat reading the newspaper on a small park bench near Milltown Square, as he often did. Next to him lay the Jenkins family dog, curled up peacefully. In his hand, a small cup of black coffee with no sugar, bought from the familiar mobile cart. A young man in a logistics uniform approached quietly. He looked to be in his early 20s, shoulders still dusted from the road, eyes carrying something unspoken. "Sir, are you the man from the video? I saw you in that clip. I almost resigned from service. Thought I didn't matter." Walter looked up. "And now?" he asked, not judging, just waiting. The young soldier took a breath. "I stayed because I thought, if a mechanic like you once saved a general's life without needing recognition, then maybe I can do my small part, and do it well." Walter placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "As long as you don't leave the person beside you behind, you've never lost." That day, the young soldier walked away with a different kind of smile than the one he'd arrived with. And Walter, still seated on the old bench, gave a small nod as the breeze passed by. No medal ceremony, no official speech, but a new generation had heard him. It was an evening colder than usual for the time of year. Walter Harlan sat in his small room in Milltown, a warm yellow lamp casting a soft glow over the books he was sorting for the local library. On the table lay the pale cream envelope, its red wax seal still intact, though already opened. He opened it once more, not to read, but simply to feel it in his hands. The paper had begun to yellow, but the handwriting remained bold and sure. "I never had the courage to honor you publicly, but if I had to choose again, I'd ask you to pin my medal. Not any general. Everett Monroe." On the back of the letter, Walter had never noticed a faint handwritten line, the ink slightly smudged. "I don't need the world to know your name, Walter. Only that I was the first to remember it when I closed my eyes." Walter folded the letter carefully, placed it back into the envelope, and tucked it into the wooden box in the corner of his desk. The one where he kept only the most important things, a photo of his mother, the armband embroidered with EM, and an old handkerchief from 1968. That night, there were no stage lights. No one knocked at the door. Only the wind outside the porch carrying the distant song of crickets, and a quiet feeling deep within that some people never needed their name on any list, because they already had a place in someone's heart. Some names are carved into stone. Some are spoken aloud at grand ceremonies. But there are those who live quietly, give quietly, and never ask to be known. Walter Harlan was no general. He wore no rank, gave no speeches. He was simply a man who never turned his back on a comrade, in the middle of a war-torn jungle, and to the very end never turned his back on his own kindness. He didn't need his name on a funeral guest list, because he already had a place, in the heart of the friend he once saved, in the memory of a widow who waited for him to arrive, and in the eyes of a younger generation learning once more what honor means, and what dignity truly looks like. If you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever wondered whether what you do is too small to matter, remember Walter Harlan, because the ones who quietly hold the world's dignity in place are the very reason it hasn't fallen apart. If you believe that kindness doesn't need recognition to be worth telling, help us share this story. And don't forget to subscribe to follow more journeys of those who remain unseen, but never without light.